Aloha, welcome to Hawaii News Now's extended stream. I'm Emily Cristobal, and today we have another episode of the Debrief. With the city's rail system having now been open to the public for a little less than a week, state lawmakers discuss how this new form of public transportation will impact surrounding communities, from housing, development, and other potential changes. I spoke with freshman State Senator Brandon Elefante and State Representative Rachel Lamosao about these topics, as well as their experience as newly elected lawmakers in this episode of The Debrief. Aloha, welcome to the Debrief from Hawaii News Now, where we break down the biggest issues facing the islands. I'm your host, Emily Cristobal, and today we are joined by State Senator Brandon Elefante and State Representative Rachel Lamosao. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, so these two are freshman state lawmakers, and they are here to share their experience of serving in the legislature and top issues in the communities they serve. And first off, I was hoping you both could briefly share a little bit about yourself, what districts you cover, and any committees you're a part of.
Well, I'll go first. Thank you, Emily, and thank you to Hawaii News Now for hosting Representative Lamosao and myself. So I was born and raised in the Aiea Pro City area, grew up in that, went away for school, and chose to come back home and started off my career actually in banking and higher education and as a teacher. And I decided that I wanted to do more than be in the classroom. So that's when I chose to run for office, because I wanted to be part of the decision making at the table for the future of our economy and future state issues. And so I'm grateful. I served on the city council for 8 years and was there actually for a total of 12, working with my late mentor, the late Senator Breen Harimoto. So I'm really excited. We just got through our first legislative session, and I'm happy to be representing my hometown.
Yes, and how about you, Representative?
I'm Rochelle Lamosao. I represent the Waipahu District, District 36, and I am on the Economic Development Committee as a vice chair and a member of the Tourism and Finance Committee. And you know, the reason why I ran for office was because I was a single mom for almost 7 years, and I knew the struggle of just being a single working parent. So I can imagine what families in my community face as working parents and families. And so I wanted to do more for my community that raised me, and so that's why I'm here.
Yes, well, thank you so much for sharing all of that. And I'm super excited to get into these topics of, being freshman lawmakers and the issues that you guys are, looking to push forward. Senator, if you could go first, what are some of the top issues that you're hoping to accomplish and talk about in this legislative session going forward?
Yeah, thank you, Emily, for that question. And some of the top issues prior to me getting into office, I've seen them during my tenure on the council for 8 years. Had to do with crime, housing, and homelessness, and those issues still resonate with a lot of members from the communities that I represent. But in addition to that, I really had an opportunity to focus on working on state issues and state policy. And one of the key issues in the community and hearing from community concerns was the new Aiea football field and track that's been neglected for many years and hasn't been improved. So that was one of our top priorities. I'm pleased to announce that we're able to get $7 million for a new track and also field for the Aiea community. And so that's something that, in partnership with working with local leaders in the community and my colleagues in the state and house, we were able to get past this session.
Yes, and Representative, anything that you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, so for myself, as I mentioned, I was a working parent or single parent for so many years. And so one of the initiatives I really wanted to focus in on, and although we did increase our earned income tax credit last session, we looked at it again and decided, our families really need more disposable income so that they can provide for their families and purchase basic necessities for their homes. And so we did another increase this year, and we also expanded the food excise tax credit so that not just families, but everyone in Hawaii and those who make a certain amount of income have additional funds for necessities that they can provide for themselves and for their families. Yeah.
And I wanted to go into those topics of housing, being able to afford living in Hawaii, and even like the money that you mentioned of income. It's been a phrase that we've tossed around a lot, priced out of paradise. What do you kind of say to the people of Hawaii of what you guys are doing at the legislature to, push forward these things to, keep people living in Hawaii, locals, Native Hawaiians, all of that?
I think what Representative Lamasao has touched upon some key critical issues and getting the folks really on the fringes and helping them out with families. We do hear that conversation. Housing always has come up through the many decades, whether it's at the city or state level. And a couple of things that we're able to do is on the eve of the opening of the Skyline, is transit-oriented development plans, or state has parcels and properties around the Skyline area that can produce more housing, that can address issues of homelessness. Also, we looked at teacher housing. We understand that teachers, there is a shortage of that, but also there's a need for really catering to teachers, and also just local families that want to come back home. I know there was a recent, Native Hawaiian conference in our 9th island, Las Vegas, and many of them, have chosen to go there, but part of that is because of the cost of living here, and it's a struggle. So hopefully a lot of the policies that we work on going forward can address that, whether it's through funding, whether it's through tax credits, whether it's through other issues of building, more housing to make it affordable.
And Representative, is there anything that you wanted to say to that as well?
So this past month, we just signed a bunch of bills. Our governor signed a bunch of bills on housing and of expanding affordable housing and access to that. So it has been a bill that increased our rental revolving fund. So that gives more access for families to be able to find, although not their first home, but at least a place to live and have shelter. We've also passed a bill that allow kupuna who are in the fringe of becoming homeless or at risk to have also means to have rent funding for themselves as well. So a bunch of those initiatives were passed a few weeks ago and signed into law. So we're excited to see what will happen. And yeah.
This is kind of a tough question. When it comes to housing and income and, just like minimum wage, some would say that, some of the things that you're doing at the legislature is kind of reactive to what's been going on. What are some solutions? Are there any solutions to even being able to bring down the cost of housing, bring down the cost of groceries, any of that, to, provide some relief for the people of Hawaii?
I think what Representative Lamasao has touched upon is really critical, in expanding the funding for rental housing. So that's one area. We can give also breaks to folks that want to build, more affordable housing. I've seen that during my time at the council, to expanding and looking at state-owned properties along the Skyline or just other areas where we can help all sectors, whether, for the moderate, low-income, working-class families, to our rental housing, to Hawaii Housing Finance Development Corporation, and what we build in Kaka'ako or even out in Kailailoa. So those are all critical needs, and we're doing our best not to be reactive, rather proactive for the long term.
Just exactly what Senator Elefante said, working with developers and working with our private sector to see what type of needs they will need to build more affordable housing is very important. And as he mentioned earlier, building along the TOD will definitely help with some of that as well.
And, I wanted to get more into that experience of being a freshman lawmaker. Did you have any expectations, or has your perceptions changed of the state legislature now that you are a lawmaker? And how does it kind of compare to your previous jobs that you've held?
It's so different for me because I've been a staffer for many years. I've been a part of the legislature for 8 sessions. working with former area legislators and also for our now Lieutenant Governor Sylvia Luke. I was so used to being behind the scenes and now being a part of it and making decisions not only that impact our communities, but for the rest of the state. That is a lot of pressure, but I'm excited for what is to come, and I'm excited for the future's generation too.
Yeah, and Senator, what has that experience been like for you?
What's been interesting and exciting all at the same time, I would say it's very chaotic in the first 4 months. It's very fast paced. You're reading through thousands of bills. We're at the city council, we take our time. You're lucky if you get over 100 bills in 1 year. At the legislature, you get over 3,000. And it's really diving into that and reading all the bills, resolutions. I would say for Representative Lamasao and I, we're no strangers. We were former staffers at one point in time. And I've worked with her in the community when she was a board member on the Waipahu Neighborhood Board. So you already have those relationships. So it makes it sort of easier where you kind of already have a foot in the door, where you're not kind of a fish out of water being like, oh, what is this? But I would say this last thing is I think it's really critical for each of us, to really have a good support system, which is our staff. And I believe that for both of us, we have really great staff to help navigate through the process.
I think this speaks volumes too, with you both being newly elected to the legislature. How do you reach that younger generation of voters, and how important is this demographic?
I think it's very important. I know Representative Lamasao, she can talk more about, the freshman class in the House. But in the Senate, it's the first time, we've had a lot of, I think there's about 7 of us who are new. Some have come over from the House. Senator Fukunaga and myself have come over from the council, although she was a former senator before. So it's nice and it's exciting to see that and have fresh faces, in both chambers. And just really learning. It's a huge learning curve still yet for me, and I'm learning as we go. And navigate through very complex issues and seeing how we can, make a difference in our communities.
Yeah, and Representative, how about you?
Yeah, so we have 18 freshmen in the House, so it's probably the largest class in so many years. I think Speaker had said that his class was the second largest freshman group. So very exciting times, but to your question about engaging with our younger generation and getting them engaged, social media, I notice, has been a really big help in that. A lot of high school students would, direct message me, or as they say, DM me, and cheering me on, but not only that, but inviting me to community events and some of their meetings, and then just engaging with me through that, and have if they have questions, they'll reach out to me in that way. I guess email for them is kind of a far away means, but the social media is at their fingertips. So it's so easy for them to just reach me through Instagram, and that has been a way for me to engage with the younger generation. It's very good.
Yeah, I think that's super cool because, the younger generation is going to be the ones living in Hawaii,
Yes.
and eventually, they're living here now and they're going to be seeing and living through these changes that are developing. And I know it goes to show with you being invited to even community meetings, it's being able to see someone, that kind of looks like them, that kind of pushes the issues that, they care about is really rewarding and very just it's wow, if they can do it, I can do it too one day, which is a really awesome mindset to show the youth of Hawaii that it is a possibility and it's in their reach.
Right.
And, I wanted to bring this up. I was reading both of your bios on the Hawaii State Government website, and you both come from Filipino immigrant households. How do you think that has shaped your experience growing up in Hawaii? And does this have any influence to your work in the office?
For me, growing up in an immigrant household, it was a very humbling experience. I got the opportunity to see both parents working multiple jobs and just trying to their best so that my sister and I have food on the table, so that we can have, the tools that we need for school. And so, but it still is part of our community today, where that, it takes a family or it takes a village to really raise a child. And that was my experience growing up in a Filipino household. And so I carry that with me because I believe that it really does take a village to raise our next generation. It's not just one person. So I always engage with everyone to make sure that the needs of our children are met. And, we're not lacking in that, and just continuously striving to make sure that the community, especially in Waipahu, have that foundation.
Yes, and Senator, how about you?
Yeah, it has helped tremendously and shaped the context of my background and growing up. I would say, yes, I'm an Asian American, but more specifically, I'm a Filipino Vietnamese Asian American. And I'm just truly grateful for my mother, single mom. I can resonate with what Representative Lamosal, seeing my mom and relying on her family that have come here and worked hard. And to this day, you still have a lot of immigrants, not just Filipinos, but from all walks of life who, do their best on a day-to-day to make ends meet, some even working multiple jobs just to provide food and a future for their children or grandchildren. So I like to say, we're recipients of that, and that we use our education and our experience to better our communities and world. And just knowing how far they've come from going back to, both her and I, we sit on the Filipino caucus. So although that's a fragment or a big part of our community, we represent, pretty much everyone. But that has provided the context for how we look at the struggles and how we can resonate and understand the issues a little better.
Yes, thank you so much for answering that question, and definitely something that I'm sure resonates with a lot of viewers, including myself, who also have parents who immigrated from the Philippines. So it is really awesome to, see the work that you're doing and the good work to, uplift the community, and not only for Filipinos, but, for all the cultures and ethnicities in Hawaii. And, speaking of education too, in this past legislative session, we've seen students come in to introduce Filipino curriculum into Hawaii's public school education. This is like a really big move, because even with me growing up in school, you had the main Japanese, Chinese, but not too much of the Filipinos. But how important is bringing up this curriculum to have as an elective for students to take? And what impact does this have?
So in Waipahu, the population is about 68% Filipino. So that is more than half, of course. And having this curriculum in our state is so important because, our Filipino culture is very much a part of our American culture now. And if you go throughout the whole country, you'll bump into a Filipino. And our food is pretty much everywhere as well. And so it's so important to educate those who may not know about our culture, about our history. And so, and especially at plantation times, right? Learning about how our Filipinos, or the Sakadas, really establish our communities here is so important to understand. And so it doesn't get lost. That's what it really is about.
I agree. And it's the importance of, knowing where you came from, knowing what role they had in the community of, coming to Hawaii as immigrants, and seeing how that weaves in with Native Hawaiians and the other immigrant cultures that did come here too. And Senator, is there anything that you wanted to add to that conversation as well?
Well, just briefly, I think Rep. Lamasal summed it up really well. And, not just only our Filipino culture, but really all our cultures that we have here, to have it as part of our curriculum. Most people don't get an understanding per se of the Filipino culture, whether it's through a person they know or being from that community, or when they get to the University of Hawaii at Manoa, and taking ethnic study courses or whatever that might be. So I think it's important to have that diversity aspect so that we form a well-rounded mind for our next generation of leaders.
I also wanted to touch on, the city's rail system. It's opening, and the Skyline goes through each of your districts. While it's not a state operation, how do you feel about the project finally opening? Representative, if you could go first.
I know there's a lot of excitement in my community because of their dependence on public transportation. So I am just happy that although it's not the complete project, at least we get to finally use a segment that will be very beneficial to my community.
And how will it affect your community?
Oh, it's an exciting time. We're really, truly at a pivotal moment in our Hawaii history where rail Skyline is really a game changer for communities. We talked about housing, we talked about economic development, and just so much potential. The state does have a nexus with it because the state did help with funding the rail. And without the state's help and kokua, we wouldn't be here where we are today for getting a big portion and also state lands around it. So it really will move people. It's really about our future. As freshman lawmakers, we're not just looking for today. We're looking for tomorrow and the days beyond on how that could impact many people with having a great alternative to not getting in your vehicle driving to where you need to go.
Yeah, and Representative Lamosal, one of the rail stations stops near that Times in Waipahu.
Yes.
We've reported that grocery store is set to close down and be replaced with an affordable housing complex. And there's also talk of, the Don Quixote in the area also closing down eventually. What do you say to residents who live in the area and who may be worried they won't have access to nearby grocery stores?
For that, I think it's such an opportune time to really rethink what could potentially be there. And I know with the proposed affordable housing that's set to be on the Kamehameha Schools or Times property, that I know they are looking at retail space. So mixed use. So, although in the meantime we might not have, but I think the conversations is still given opportunity to rethink what we really need in those areas. We still have other places like the festival marketplace. We still have nearby grocery stores, although it may be a drive or a public transportation ways away. But I think it's just now an opportunity for us to rethink how we look at these areas and what we really want there.
Yeah, thank you for addressing that and what we were talking about earlier, like the need for affordable housing in Hawaii. So seeing how to weave both in and finding that balance. Even in Aiea, the Halava station, Aloha Stadium areas, there's a lot of development being planned. And I guess my question for you both is, how do you kind of keep that essence of the community that's there when there's so much development being planned? Senator, if you could go first.
Yeah, so I've been involved for the last decade in the early conversations of partying and putting together some of those plans for the Halava station and the Kala'ao station in Aiea, Pearl Ridge station. And it's important to engage the community in every step of the way so that a lot of the community's concerns are incorporated in the plans. Yet we know that change is coming, especially a lot of the properties, although not in my area and my colleague Senator Wakai's area, on the Makai side of Kamehameha Highway in the Aiea area, where we have Pearl Ridge, we have Kamehameha Schools that owns lands, very few parcels that state owns. But I think with Aloha Stadium, that's a really critical piece for some big mixed-use development, and I'm hopeful that we'll get something good to develop that will really transform, but still not lose sight of the history and context of those neighborhoods and not truly displace people, and that people can still want to live there if they choose to.
And Representative, how about you? How do you see this development going on and, keeping that community aspect as well?
Yeah, exactly what Senator Alfonte mentioned, keeping the community members engaged in every step of the process is so important because we have a very vocal kupuna community in Waipahu, and it's not because we don't want development. It's because we love our community so much. We grew up there. And so we want our developers to really put themselves in our shoes and put themselves in a position of a community member to really rethink what the needs of our community really is. And so that's why it's so important to stay engaged with community groups and community members throughout the process. Yeah.
And I definitely think it's going to be really interesting to see how this rail system is going to impact these communities and hopefully, maybe bring some, like, it'll be like thriving again in some areas. I mean, thinking about just like Pearl Ridge, you have the Pearl Ridge Shopping Center. For the longest time, that Sears section has just been closed down, and every time I walk down that side of the mall, I'm kind of like, oh man, like I remember like the good old days growing up and like walking around Sears and all of that, and kind of seeing like how it's still like a well-used shopping center, but maybe another big name or something that will help the community go in its place and see what maybe that could bring. And even Waipahu, back in like the history of Hawaii, like Waipahu was that central area, like sugarcane plantations, and maybe it'll bring the revitalization of that community. So really interesting to just see what can come up with, this rail system. And, I wanted to go into, for any young person looking to run for state office one day, what advice do you have for them?
I would say there are a couple of things. First is you have to find out what is your why. Like, why do you want to serve? And is your why big enough that you want to? The two W's, address your why and your want. During that time when I was first thinking about public office, I, got involved in the same similar fashion that Rep. Lamasao got involved. And here's a true story. I reached out to Barack Obama, was coming on scene. And, he was someone from Hawaii, and he was on social media. And Rep. Lamasao talked about that. And that was one of the first engagements I had was, seeing him and reaching out through his Twitter account. And, when he became, president of the United States, it was truly remarkable, that someone from Hawaii could do it. And anyone can, whether it's on a neighborhood board or in local elective office at your city council, whatever it may be. I think if your why is big enough and you want to serve and make an impact, hey, go for it, because there's a lot of potential for you to make a huge impact, like how we've seen with this freshman class. A lot of great ideas out there, and it's really about the future. The decisions we make today will have an impact for our generation and future generations.
Then what's some advice that you have, Representative?
Well, I really like Senator Alapate's message, but just to add on to that, be as genuine as much as possible. Just be yourself no matter what people say, and remember to always respect those around you, and to just never give up on your dreams. Like I said, I was a single mother for so many years, and being a young mom, there's a lot of stigma to that, especially in our Filipino American community. And so, but I fought through that, and I want to share that same glory with everyone, because for me, being a state legislature is not being about just being successful, but it's also about raising up our communities as well. Yeah.
Finally, what are you both most looking forward to in accomplishing in your role as lawmakers, and what kind of positive change do you hope to see? Representative, if you could go first.
Yeah, so this past session and working closely with our Filipino caucus and also the Waipahu community, I've got a lot of inquiries about immigration services and how processing petitions for family members, or just finding ways to get a green card in America. And I know we have the Filipino Community Center is such a central place for a lot of our community members. And so really expanding our role in immigrant services, whether it be through the Department of Digital Relations, and labor. So expanding that the needs for immigrant services is so important. Thank you.
And Senator, how about you?
Yeah, so when I first came on, it was back in November, and there was such a short window to work on and craft legislation. So now during this interim, we just put out our end of session newsletter, and we've been receiving feedback on our survey. And it's no surprise that some of the themes that arise from community members is crime, housing, and homelessness. While there's a nexus between city and state issues, I'm going to focus on, how do we look at maybe harsher sentences for repeat offenders or crimes that they may commit against our kapuna, to looking at more housing or affordable housing and incentives for that. and looking at ways on how we can take the models of what's been successful with homelessness and apply it, because they're throughout our state. And those are some near and dear issues I want to work on, in addition to water land issues, the committee I sit on, and transportation, especially at our airports. We definitely use that, and upgrading facilities there and really building for that future. And all in all, I would say, during our time, it's been exciting in this first session, and I know our work is not done. And so we're rolling up our sleeves to really make an impact and work with the communities that we represent to, address their concerns they have.
Yes, awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of that. And I'm really looking forward to seeing all the work that you do in, the legislature, and seeing all the things that will help uplift the community, and seeing all the great work that you do. Thank you so much again for joining me on this.
Thank you, Emily.
Thank you.
You can watch and listen to more of The Debrief at hawaiinewsnow.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Hope you tune in next week. This is your host, Emily Cristobal, and mahalo for listening.